No, as a group, though, did you ever have an idea of what kind of music you play?
Just rock and roll.
Long before anyone called them Creedence Clearwater Revival, 4 teenagers in Northern California were quietly building something that looked ordinary on the outside and ruthless on the inside. A band that could lock into a groove with almost no wasted motion. They started playing together back in 1959, years before the world had any reason to care, and they kept going through name changes and dead ends that would have killed most groups early. At first, there was no CCR sound, no swamp, no bayou myth, no protest anthems echoing through American culture. There was just repetition, rehearsal rooms, local gigs, the slow process of learning how to make 4 different personalities hit the same beat at the same instant. That's the part most timelines skip, because it's not glamorous. But this is where the later miracle gets manufactured. The tighter a band becomes in obscurity, the faster it can explode when the door finally opens. Then came the second identity, the Gollywogs, a name that never truly fit and that the band later disliked. But it kept them moving forward, recording and functioning like a real unit even before the world recognized them. The key detail isn't the name, it's that they stayed together. In rock history, that alone is rare. The same core players sharpening their timing year after year, building a muscle memory that would later make their songs feel inevitable, like they had always existed. And here's the twist that matters for everything later. CCR didn't rise because they suddenly found talent. They rose because they had already done the hard part in private. They became a precision machine before they ever became famous. When the hits come, it's going to look effortless. But Phase 1 tells you the truth. The effortless era is built on years where nothing worked, except the band itself. By 1967, the 4 men who would become Creedence Clearwater Revival had already learned a painful lesson. Talent alone doesn't create identity. They had survived years under names that never quite fit, recording songs that sounded fine but felt borrowed, like they were wearing someone else's clothes. What they lacked wasn't skill, it was belief, a shared sense of who they were supposed to be. Then the name arrived, Creedence Clearwater Revival. It didn't sound modern, it didn't sound psychedelic. It sounded old, rural, almost ceremonial, like a forgotten American institution pulled out of a dusty archive. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because the name did something dangerous and powerful at the same time. It created expectations. It promised roots, honesty, earth, water, work, memory. Before anyone heard a single new song, the audience was already imagining rivers, heat, porches, and small towns. The band hadn't changed geography. They were still California musicians, but the story had changed. And once a story locks in, people hear music differently. Here's the twist that reshapes the entire CCR myth. The band didn't discover a Southern sound. They designed one. Carefully, deliberately. John Fogerty began stripping the music down, rejecting excess, cutting away ornament, focusing on rhythm, pulse, and imagery that felt older than radio. Short songs, clear hooks, no wasted space. Every track had to feel like it had always existed, even if it was brand new. From the outside, it looked like authenticity. From the inside, it was discipline. And discipline quietly changes power dynamics. As the sound sharpened, one voice became central, one vision decisive. The others weren't being pushed out, not yet, but the structure was forming. The music worked because it obeyed a single compass. That compass made CCR unmistakable, and it also planted the seed of future resentment. So Phase 2 isn't just about a name change. It's about the moment CCR stopped chasing trends and started manufacturing inevitability. Once the name and sound aligned, success was no longer a question of if, only how fast. And speed is never neutral. When Creedence Clearwater Revival released their first album in 1968, it didn't arrive like a revolution. There was no explosion, no sudden cultural takeover. What it did instead was far more dangerous. It worked. The songs landed, radio responded, audiences listened and stayed. For the first time, The idea of CCR wasn't just convincing, it was validated. To the outside world, this looked like the birth of a solid band finding its footing. 4 members, 1 name, 1 sound. Everything about it suggested balance. That illusion matters, because listeners trust bands that look united. They assume shared credit, shared risk, shared voice. And CCR, at this point, looked exactly like that. But under the surface, the internal structure was already locked in. John Fogerty wasn't just writing songs. He was shaping arrangements, controlling tempo, deciding where guitars sat in the mix, and defining what didn't belong in a CCR song just as much as what did. This wasn't ego yet. It was efficiency. The band had spent nearly a decade failing quietly, and now that something finally worked, nobody wanted to slow it down. Here's the twist that reframes this entire phase. The debut album didn't create equality, it normalized imbalance. Because once a system produces results, questioning it feels reckless. If one person's instincts are delivering momentum, the safest move is to let that person keep steering. So the band leaned into the structure instead of examining it. They didn't argue about control, they trusted it. And in doing so, they traded short-term clarity for long-term fragility. This is the moment where CCR's future is quietly decided. Not when they break up, not when arguments explode. Right here, when success arrives early enough that nobody dares disrupt the formula. The audience hears a band coming together. The band feels relief, and the imbalance stops feeling temporary. From now on, every hit will reinforce this model. Every win will make it harder to challenge, and the next phase will turn proof into dominance, so fast that no one has time to ask what it's costing them. By 1969, Creedence Clearwater Revival were no longer rising. They were everywhere. Radio, charts, jukeboxes, cars with windows down. Their songs didn't feel like new releases. They felt like public property, as if America had always been waiting for them and simply forgot to turn the volume up earlier. This is the year most bands would call their arrival at immortality. CCR were releasing hit after hit with almost industrial efficiency, while other groups chased longer songs, stranger experiments, and bigger spectacle. CCR did the opposite. They stayed tight, short, focused, relentless. No psychedelia detours, no indulgence, just songs that landed and moved on. And then came the ultimate validation, Woodstock. On paper, this should have sealed the myth forever. Woodstock is remembered as the defining cultural moment of a generation, and CCR were there, right in the center of it. A band at its absolute peak, performing at the most famous festival in history. If this were a normal story, this would be the chapter that turns them into legends in slow motion. But here's the twist that almost no one talks about. CCR's Woodstock performance didn't become part of the legend. Their set happened late, after hours of chaos, exhaustion, and rain. The band themselves felt the performance suffered. When the festival was later transformed into a film and a myth, CCR were effectively erased from that narrative. Other acts became symbols of the era. CCR, despite being one of the most successful bands of that exact moment, did not. So something strange happened. In the same year they dominated the charts, they missed the cultural freeze frame that would define them forever in the public imagination. This matters more than it sounds. Because CCR were suddenly living in 2 realities at once. Commercially unstoppable, but mythologically incomplete. Their songs were everywhere, yet their image wasn't elevated into untouchable legend status the way some of their peers were. They were the soundtrack, not the poster. And inside the band, pressure was building fast. Success had accelerated the existing structure instead of loosening it. The machine demanded output. Albums, singles, tours, no breathing room. The system that had once felt efficient now felt compulsory. There was no space to renegotiate roles, no pause to reflect, because momentum punishes hesitation. 1969 looks like the top of the mountain. In reality, it's the point where the climb becomes unsustainable. CCR didn't fail at Woodstock. They survived it. And survival, in this case, meant missing the myth. and continuing forward at full speed with nowhere left to grow except inward. By 1970, Creedence Clearwater Revival were operating at a level most bands never reach, and almost none survive. The hits kept coming. The albums kept selling. Their sound was instantly recognizable, trusted, and expected. CCR had become a certainty in an industry built on risk. From the outside, this looked like stability. From the inside, it felt like acceleration with no brakes. The band's system was now fully exposed. John Fogerty's role had expanded from leader to load bearer. Writing, arranging, producing, deciding, everything ran through him. Not because he demanded it in speeches, but because the machine depended on it. Every tour date, every studio session, every deadline reinforced the same logic. Don't touch what's working. Here's the twist that defines this phase. CCR's greatest strength, consistency, eliminated the space needed for survival. The others weren't just bandmates anymore. They were passengers on a schedule that never stopped. They played the songs flawlessly. They toured relentlessly. But they no longer recognized themselves in the decisions being made. The music that connected millions began to create distance between the people making it. And there was no dramatic blow-up yet. That's the dangerous part. Everything looked functional, profitable, controlled, which made dissent feel irresponsible. How do you argue against a system that keeps winning? So pressure went inward. Frustration turned quiet. Resentment didn't shout. It waited. And the more successful CCR became, the harder it was to admit that something fundamental was cracking. 1970 isn't the year CCR start falling apart. It's the year they lose the ability to slow down. Every band needs moments where success loosens its grip, where people can renegotiate roles, rest, breathe, change direction. CCR skipped that phase entirely. Their momentum was too strong, and momentum, unchecked, doesn't ask permission before it turns into force. By the end of this year, the question inside the band wasn't, can we keep going? It was, at what cost? In 1971, the story of Creedence Clearwater Revival finally changed in a way the public could see. Until now, everything that threatened the band had been internal, unspoken, unresolved, and hidden behind perfect performances. This is the year that stops being possible. Tom Fogerty leaves the band. On the surface, this looks like a typical rock band fracture. Creative differences, burnout, the familiar language of departure. But that explanation is too small to explain what actually happened. Tom wasn't just another member. He was John Fogerty's older brother, part of the band since the earliest anonymous years. His exit wasn't just a personnel change. It was the collapse of the band's original social core. Here's the twist that reframes the moment. Tom didn't cause the breakdown. He exposed it. By the time he walked away, the internal balance had already shifted beyond repair. John's creative control had become absolute out of necessity, and necessity had quietly turned into permanence. Tom, once an equal presence, now occupied a space that felt increasingly marginal. Leaving wasn't an act of rebellion, it was an act of clarity. And what's important is, what didn't happen. The band didn't stop, they didn't pause, they didn't reassess. CCR continued as a trio, still touring, still releasing music, still functioning. To the outside world, this looked like resilience. But resilience can be misleading, because when a foundational member leaves and the structure doesn't change, it means the structure was already indifferent to that person's presence. CCR didn't adapt after Tom's departure. They simply revealed how replaceable parts had become. 1971 isn't the end of CCR. It's the moment the band becomes fragile enough that every future decision now carries fatal weight. By 1972, Creedence Clearwater Revival were no longer trying to chase greatness. They were trying to survive each other. After years of imbalance, resentment finally surfaced in the form of a solution that sounded fair on paper and fatal in practice. Equal songwriting. No more single guiding voice. No more central authority. Every remaining member would contribute songs. Equality would fix what control had broken. This is the most misunderstood moment in the CCR story, because it looks like rebellion against dominance, when in reality, it's an admission that trust is gone. The band finally got what some members had wanted for years: equal space, only to discover that equality can't replace direction. CCR had been built like a straight road, fast, focused, unmistakable. This new version had intersections, detours, hesitation. The engine still worked, but the map was gone. Shortly after, the end came, not with drama, not with a final explosion, but with resignation. CCR disbanded in late 1972. No farewell tour, no grand statement, just the recognition that the thing holding them together no longer existed. 1972 isn't when CCR failed, because once the music stopped, the conflict didn't. What followed was not a nostalgic cooling-off period, but years of legal battles, bitterness, and distance, especially around ownership, publishing, and control of the catalog. The songs that had once united millions now existed inside contracts, courtrooms, and grievances. CCR didn't fade into history, they hardened into positions. Here's the final twist, and it reframes everything that came before. CCR became bigger after they stopped existing, but smaller as human relationships. Their music entered a strange second life. If anything, the permanence of the catalog made reconciliation harder. You can't renegotiate the past when it's playing on the radio every day. And that's the paradox at the heart of CCR's story. The songs feel communal, warm, shared, built for singing together. The people who made them couldn't find a way back to that same space. So the timeline ends where most legends don't. Not in triumph, not in tragedy, but in permanence. Creedence Clearwater Revival didn't burn out. They locked in place. The music keeps rolling, untouched by time. The band remains frozen at the moment trust broke. And that's why their story still pulls people in. Not because it's loud, but because it's unresolved.